All right, so this is 17A, midpoint formula. Okay, and here's how I want you to, well, let's start here. If you took 2 quizzes, and one of them you got a 13 out of 25, and the other one you got a 22 out of 25, and you wanted to know your average, what would you do? Add them together, divide by 2, because there's 2 numbers there, right? Essentially, what you're doing with that is you're finding a midpoint, just thinking in terms of instead of a point, you found numbers, right? Well, now midpoint formula is finding the point that's in the middle of something. Elijah, you with me right now? Yeah. So what you're going to do is we're going to think of it like this, okay? Say we have a number line. And there's a point here that we'll call A, and a point here that we call B. And we want to know the midpoint of those 2 points that we have. Well, your midpoint formula says you take the A value plus the B value and you cut it in half, okay? You split the difference, in other words, and that's going to be your midpoint right here, okay? A plus B divided by 2. So if I'm looking at a number line and I have a -4 and I have a +6, and I want to know what's the point perfectly. That doesn't look like it's perfectly in the middle, does it? That's really ugly. Try again. What's the point that falls in the middle of those 2 points? What do? Plug what in? -4 plus 6 divided by 2, right? So -4 plus 6 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that means your midpoint here is at the number 1. Right? If you think of it this way, you have to go 5 units to get to a -4. You have to go 5 units to get to 6. It's perfectly in the middle of the 2. Okay? So that's on a number line. What we're going to do more of, majority of, is on a coordinate plane instead. So you're going to have X values and Y values instead of just one value. Okay? So here's the rule. Here's the formula for the coordinate plane. It says, if A is your x1, y1 value, and B is your x2, y2 value, then the midpoint of segment AB is this point, M, which would be x1 plus x2, that's a 2, divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2, okay? So that is midpoint formula. Who thinks they've seen that before? Good chunk of you? Okay. That's what we're going to be doing today. There's some that are a little simpler than others and some that require a little extra effort here. So my first example for you is this. Let's say EF, segment EF, has endpoints E, yeah, we're moving all over the place, which is 7, 5, and F, which is 2, -4. What are the coordinates that's abbreviated, coordinates. What are the coordinates of the midpoint of segment EF? Okay, so we know the endpoints. We want the midpoint. Well, if we take this midpoint formula, You got to keep in mind every point in the coordinate plane has an x value and a y value, right? So what I highly recommend, if this gets a little confusing for you, is that you label what is x1, what is y1, what is x2, what is y2, okay? So for E, point E, we're going to call that our x1 and our y1, okay? Point F, we're going to call that our x2 and our y2. And I'll tell you right now, the place that most people go wrong on these problems is they look at point E up here and they label it x1, x2. Okay, but think about a point always has an x and a y. So be very careful that you have an x and a y and that your 1s stay together and your 2s stay together. It doesn't matter if you flip them. I could call E x2, y2 and F x1, y1, but the 1s have to stay together, the 2s have to stay together, okay? All right, so if this is my setup, and I'm gonna plug it into this midpoint formula, I'm gonna plug in x1, so 7, plus what? 2, right? x2. So 7 plus 2 divided by 2 is going to be my new x value, okay? Then I have to do my y values. So y1 is 5 plus y2, which is -4, and divide that by 2. And now all you have to do with that is simplify your values. So 7 plus 2 divided by 2, that would be 9 divided by 2. 5 plus -4 is 1, divided by 2. So you could say your midpoint is 9/2, 1/2. As long as it's a reduced fraction, I don't care if you leave it improper like this. I feel like most of the time people want a decimal instead. So if you just divide that, it'd be 4.5 and 0.5. Either one of those is fine. Just pick one. Okay, I don't care which one you give me. They're both the same thing. Questions on that? So that's plugging it into the midpoint formula, just how you see it, okay? The question that tends to give people a little more difficulty is this one. So this is example 2. And this one you're going to find an endpoint. Okay, so instead of finding the midpoint, they're going to give you the midpoint, they're going to give you one endpoint, and you have to find the other endpoint. So I'm going to show you a couple ways to do this, but I'm going to show you a picture first. A graph, really. All right, let's say you're given these points. You have segment CD, okay? We know that C is -5, 7. Oops. And we know the midpoint is -2, 1. Okay, I want to know the other endpoint, D. Okay, that's what we're trying to find in this problem. So we have an endpoint, we have a midpoint, we need the other endpoint. Here's what I want you to think about. If I were to graph this, okay, C is -5, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. There's point C. Okay, my midpoint is -2, 1. Think about a segment. If M is the midpoint of that segment, my segment should be somewhere around there, right? The other end of it should be somewhere down here. So you can always check your answer by just plotting it if you need that extra, like, verification, okay? here's how we find it. And I'm going to show you two ways. The first way I'm going to show you is not the way the book would show you, but I feel like it's quicker if you can see it this way. So I'm going to show you this way. You don't have to do it this way, okay? First way I'm going to show you, if you think about a number line, forget about the fact that we have a coordinate plane. Just think number line right now, okay? On a number line, if I just look at my x's, I have a -5 and I have a -2, okay? How many units is it between -5 and -2? 3, right? We jumped 3 units to the right. So if I go 3 more units this way, where will I end up? At a +1, okay? Now look at your y's. If on a number line, I'm at 7 and I'm at 1, okay? This one's my midpoint. This one was my midpoint, right? Which is where you need to be careful on these. How far did I go to the left to get from 7 to 1? 6 units. If I go 6 more units this way, where do I end up? -5, okay? Your answer for D is 1, -5. Does that make sense? If I go here, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I didn't draw my line very well, but that puts me right there. Makes sense for where my thing is set up, right? Okay, so that's what I would say the quick route to solving this. The thing you have to be careful with is where do you put your numbers on the number line? What direction are you going? Which one's your midpoint? Which one's your end point? Okay? If you'd rather do it the way the book's gonna do it, that would be using the midpoint formula slightly differently. So here's how you would do that instead. Let me rewrite our numbers here so I can show you. C is at -5, 7. The midpoint is -2, 1. Okay? Midpoint formula says x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is our midpoint, okay? Here's what you're gonna do if you do it this route. Your C is your x1, y1, but we don't know x2, y2. We know the x for our midpoint and the y for our midpoint, okay? So what we do is we break up the x's and y's. So I'm just gonna start with the x's, okay? x1 is -5. What is x2? We don't know, right? That's what we're trying to solve for. So x2, we're gonna call x2 divided by 2. What should that equal? What's my x value for my midpoint? -2. That's this guy right here, right? So we did x1 and x midpoint is gonna go out here. So now it's algebra. If I wanna solve this, I'm gonna multiply by 2 on both sides, so this is gone. So I get -4 equals -5 plus my x2 value. I'm gonna add 5 to both sides. So 1 is my x2, okay? Now I'm gonna do the same thing with my y's. So here's my y's. We're gonna use this formula, y1 plus y2 over 2. So I have y1, which is 7, plus y2, which we don't know, divided by 2. And what's my y midpoint? Oh, that's this guy here, the 1, right? So that's going to equal 1. So what you're going to do is you're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So 2 equals, this cancels, 7 plus y2. So take away 7. 2 minus 7 is -5 for my y2 value. So my point, my new end point, is 1, -5. Okay, go back up here. What do we find for RD? 1, -5. So depending on which method you like better, you will get the same answer. Okay, it's up to you. How many of you think you'll do the first way I showed you? How many think you do the second way I showed you? Okay, so a little bit of each. I'm going to give you some numbers right now that you can try on your own for whichever method you like. And then I'll tell you what your answer should have been. So if your midpoint is 4, -9, and one of your endpoints is -3, -5. Man, my hand keeps getting in the way today. Okay, find the other endpoint. So M is your midpoint, A and B are your endpoints. Find what B would be. Okay, and for those of you that, I'm not going to show the number line way because I feel like you can kind of do that one in your head. I'm going to work out the other way, so if you don't want to see it, don't look up. Okay? And then if you want to see it, just watch what I'm doing. Oops. Okay, so if you're going to do the second way, this would be your initial setup. Okay? I would multiply by 2 here, multiply by 2 here, so you'd get this. Okay, and then I'm going to do this. Okay, so that'd be your x value. That's going to go here. Your y value, multiply by 2, multiply by 2, so -18. This canceled. We're going to do this. So you would get that. So if you have an answer and you want to check it, that's the one I have boxed up here. That's what your answer should be for those numbers. Okay. Any questions? And keep in mind, you could always graph these and get it without having to do anything but graphing them technically. Because if you think about it, if this truly is the midpoint, I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down and 1, 2, 3 over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down and 3 over again puts me there. So it is possible to graph it and not do any of the algebra and get the right answer. Okay, did you guys get your number? 11, -13 is what it should have been.